From Mutual Radio News, 1981, the year in review. I'm Peter Mayer, Mutual News, reporting the top stories of 1981.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President.
The planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace.
Every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well.
There was a short burst of gunfire. Bang, bang, bang. They took
the president was shot once in the left side.
The Pope has indeed been shot.
President Sadat's coffin was lowered into its resting place beneath
the cruel night of darkness and silence. Long live Poland.
Space Shuttle Columbia is on her way.
If they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated. I will send to the Senate the nomination of Judge Sandra Day O'Connor of Arizona.
Charles Philip Arthur George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife?
Coming up, the sounds of the year's top stories as Mutual News presents 1981, the year in review. (1981) was the year of Ronald Reagan. The president was inaugurated, he welcomed the American hostages home from Iran, survived an assassination attempt, and forged sweeping economic changes through Congress. As January 20th, Inauguration Day, dawned, the nation still awaited word on the fate of the 52 Americans held hostage in Iran since November of 1979. President Carter, holding out hope that he could leave office with the hostages freed, was up all night before the Reagan inauguration, directing last-minute negotiations with Iran. The agreement to free the hostages was finally signed by Carter in the wee hours of January 20th. But the Iranians dangled the hostage crisis in the face of America until the last minute. The hostages were not released until after Ronald Reagan was sworn in as the 40th President of the United States. The new president used his inaugural address to call for an era of national renewal.
It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
Reagan, underscoring a familiar campaign theme, said the federal government was part of the economic problems facing the nation.
It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or to the people.
The president also had a message for potential adversaries and those he called the enemies of freedom.
Peace is the highest aspiration of the American people. We will negotiate for it, sacrifice for it. We will not surrender for it now or ever.
By the time the president concluded his inaugural address, word was spreading that the hostages were on their way to freedom. News confirmed by the president at a Capitol Hill luncheon.
The planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
And former President Carter, his voice cracking with emotion, broke the news to the hometown audience that welcomed him back to Plains, Georgia.
The aircraft carrying the 52 American hostages had cleared Iranian airspace on the first leg of a journey home, and that every one of the 52 hostages was alive, was well, and free.
As the inaugural parade stepped off in Washington, tens of thousands of people lined Pennsylvania Avenue, many of them glued to transistor radios, tuned to the final chapter of the hostage drama. The hostages are free. They are airborne. They will stop in Athens, Algiers, and West Germany before resting and returning to American soil. The nation is swept by emotion. Emotion summed up in Tampa, Florida by Elsie Koob, mother of freed hostage Catherine Koob.
Such a relief, and I'm so happy about it, but I don't know why people cry when they're happy. They shouldn't, but they do, and we're just so thankful to God that she's out of there safe and sound, and all the other 51 with her.
And in New York, this scene as hostage Barry Rosen's wife Barbara and the couple's young daughter told reporters,
Tell everybody, what did we just find out? What did we just find out? That what? Please tell us.
Daddy's coming home.
Hooray! Yes!
And the nation said hooray. with bells and sirens in Oliphant, Pennsylvania, home of freed hostage Mike Matrinko. And prayers and songs of thanksgiving. The nation looked on as the first pictures of the freed hostages were beamed from Algiers. The scene quickly shifted to Wiesbaden, West Germany, where the freed hostages arrived for rest and physical checkups and a greeting from citizen Jimmy Carter, a former president acting as the new president's representative. It was Carter who first revealed harsh treatment received by some of the captives.
Our Americans in Iran were mistreated much worse than has been previously revealed. The acts of barbarism which were perpetrated on our people by Iran can never be condoned.
The freed Americans told their own stories. Bruce German described a fake execution.
All I'll say is that was as close as I've ever come to total terror. They brought in these goons with the Uzis and G3s and shook the place down, and we assumed these classic position against the walls with our blindfolds, and they cocked the guns in our ears, and we experienced total terror.
Bruce German was the embassy budget officer. Malcolm Kalp mistreated before and after his 3 escape attempts.
They kept me handcuffed and tied for 7 straight days. They physically assaulted me, choked me, kicked me in the head, kicked me in the body, punched me in the face, punched me in the body, threw me against concrete walls, things like that.
Malcolm Kalp spent 374 days in solitary confinement in Iran. From Wiesbaden, the freed Americans were flown home to America, first to West Point for reunions with their families. And then, after 2 days of rest, it was on to Washington. Washington and the nation were wrapped in yellow ribbons, the trademark of the hostage crisis and the trademark of a nation's 444 days of hope. 200,000 people greeted the freed Americans in a triumphant motorcade through Washington. Mutual's John Bascom described the parade, and people in the crowd let their emotions flow.
Busload after busload of hostages coming by. There is one now with a sign saying, "Buy Iraqi war bonds." And it's drawing a large, enthusiastic cheer from this crowd. Hostages and their families aboard the buses, leaning up against the windows. Some of them have opened the windows, are waving out, and are taking pictures of this welcome home crowd in their nation's capital.
It's just great to have them home. Just terrific. Just like to remember my family. Say this is better than inauguration.
Just so damn happy to be an American. I can't stop crying. I'm so excited. I'm just thrilled.
At the end of the parade route, the White House, and an official welcome from President Reagan.
You've come home to a people who for 444 days suffered the pain of your imprisonment, prayed for your safety, and most importantly, shared your determination that the spirit of free men and women is not a fit subject for barter.
And this warning.
Let terrorists be aware that when the rules of international behavior are violated, our policy will be one of swift and effective retribution.
Diplomat Bruce Langan spoke for the freed hostages.
The sign that we saw as we left West Point today, along a superhighway up there, that someone had hastily put up, and the world will be better for this. We pray, Mr. President, that this will be so.
Bruce Langan's prayer was echoed January 29th by another freed hostage. Colonel Thomas Schaefer told a service at the National Cathedral.
Thank God. Thank God. It is over.
The congregation that day in January sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic, a song that many of the hostages asked Americans to sing during the days of captivity. 1981 saw some of the hostages suffer lingering emotional problems. But according to government accounts, the majority returned to their jobs and readjusted to freedom. The nation held its breath March 30th. Where were you the day President Reagan was shot? Mutual White House correspondent Bill Grudy was with the president at the Washington Hilton Hotel.
It was a short burst of gunfire. Bang, bang, bang. They took the president's limousine. The president's limousine took off quickly. James Brady has been shot in the head, I'm told. Ambulance is pulled up in front of the Hilton here. Medics are surrounding Brady.
Listen to the sound of pandemonium in the seconds after the shots were fired.
Who's got the gun? Come on, guys, we're gonna need some ambulance room. Everybody back out of there. Back out, please.
As the shots rang out, a Secret Service agent pushed Mr. Reagan into his limousine. At first, agents thought the president was not hurt. But when an alert agent noticed blood on the president's mouth, the limousine sped off to George Washington University Hospital. On the sidewalk outside the hotel were 3 wounded men: News Secretary James Brady, Secret Service man Tim McCarthy, and police officer Thomas Delahanty. The scene on March 30th quickly shifted from the Hilton Hotel to George Washington University Hospital. President Reagan, his knees buckling, walked into the emergency room. At first, it was thought Mr. Reagan suffered bruised ribs when he was shoved into the limousine. But Mutual correspondent Ross Simpson, the only reporter inside the hospital as the president was treated, found that Mr. Reagan's injuries were far more serious than a bruised rib.
He was shot in the left side of the lung. The senior medical officer here at the hospital has told my source that the bullet passed within 1 inch of the heart, and this has caused air and blood to accumulate between the lung and the chest wall.
Correspondent Simpson reported from the hospital as the president was taken into surgery. Another surgical team worked to save the life of James Brady, who had been shot in the head. Later, hospital administrator Dr. Dennis O'Leary had reassuring words about the president, but a cautious prognosis for James Brady.
The president is in the recovery room. He is in stable condition, and he is awake. He was in no time in any serious danger. He was alert and awake with stable vital signs up until the time he underwent anesthesia. He was in the operating room for approximately 2 hours.
As for Brady's condition,
the bullet did pass through his brain and came out the other side. He obviously has significant brain injury, and he is in critical condition.
Dr. O'Leary spoke after James Brady endured 4.5 hours of surgery, the first of several brain operations for Brady in the weeks after the shooting. Doctors also operated on the 2 lawmen shot in the attack on the president, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, who stopped a bullet meant for Reagan, and police officer Thomas Delahanty. Both survived the attack. As doctors took care of the wounded, police and Secret Service agents questioned John W. Hinckley, Jr., the accused attacker who was tackled moments after the shots rang out. Hinckley, the son of an oil executive, had been traveling around the country in the days before the shooting, reportedly obsessed by actress Jodie Foster. In Denver, attorney Jim Robinson spoke for Hinckley's parents.
We are grieved and heartbroken by this tragedy. John has been under recent psychiatric care. These evaluations did not alert anyone to the seriousness of his condition. We love our son John and will, of course, stand by him. Our hearts and prayers go out to the victims and their loved ones.
Hinckley family attorney Jim Robinson. At year's end, John Hinckley Jr. awaits trial on charges of shooting the president and the 3 other men. The White House was another scene of the shooting day drama. With Vice President Bush out of town, Secretary of State Alexander Haig gave a statement that later stirred controversy.
Constitutionally, gentlemen, you have the president, the vice president, and the Secretary of State in that order. And should the president decide he wants to transfer the helm to the vice president, he will do so. As of now, I am in control here in the White House, pending return of the vice president, and in close touch with him. If something came up, I would check with him, of course.
A Haig spokesman later said the secretary meant that he, as senior cabinet officer, was in charge until the vice president returned. Reagan humor pierced the clouds of that awful day in March. At the hospital, White House political advisor Lynn Nofziger passed some of the president's comments on to reporters.
He told Mrs. Reagan, honey, I forgot to duck. And then when he got into the operating room, he looked at the doctors and he said, please tell me you're Republicans.
Lynn Nofziger was the White House spokesman in the first hours after the March 30th attack. President Reagan left the hospital April 11th. 17 days after leaving the hospital, Mr. Reagan was on Capitol Hill before a joint session of Congress, thanking the nation for its prayers and support and recalling a get-well note he received.
Letter came from Peter Sweeney. He's in the 2nd grade in the Riverside School in Rockville Center. And he said, I hope you get well quick, or you might have to make a speech in your pajamas.
While the president made a miraculous recovery from his wound, it was November before News Secretary Brady went home. James Brady faces long-term therapy, but doctors say his recovery is nothing short of a miracle. You're listening to Mutual Radio's The Year in Review. On May 13th, the world was again stunned by bullets fired from a would-be assassin's gun. A man of peace, Pope John Paul II was attacked while riding in an open jeep through a place of peace, St. Peter's Square. An American, Howard Wheeler, was among the thousands trying to get closer to the Pope when...
Two shots rang out, and the Pope had a startled look on his face and fell forward, clutching his stomach.
The Pope, shot in the abdomen, hand, and arm, was rushed to a Rome hospital where he asked, why did they do it? That question was never fully answered. Although the man charged with the shooting, a Turkish terrorist named Mehmet Ali Akgah, said he acted alone to protest U.S. and Soviet imperialism, Italian prosecutors suspected a conspiracy, but they were never able to prove it. In Washington, President Reagan, still recovering from his own wound, prayed that the Pope would recover. And Senator Edward Kennedy said,
"This is a shot that has gone to the soul of the world."
Archbishop James Hickey prayed for the Pope at St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington.
In Christian faith, we have gathered to pray for His Holiness, to pray God that He be spared, and to beg the Lord that this destructive weight of terrorism and violence be lifted from our world.
The world's prayers were answered, but for the Pope, the road to recovery was long. Unlike shooting victims President Reagan and Pope John Paul, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat never had a chance. October 6th, President Sadat and most of his cabinet were watching Egypt's Armed Forces Day parade in a Cairo suburb when men in military uniforms jumped from a jeep and began tossing grenades and firing machine guns as jet fighters flew overhead. An eyewitness to the attack, New York Times reporter William Farrell described what he saw.
One of the trucks towing an artillery piece moved purposely towards the reviewing stand where Sadat and his guests and his entourage were, and fired off a couple of hand grenades and then began opening rifle fire on the stand.
Sadat's stunned bodyguards seemed frozen as the assassins rushed the reviewing stand, killing the Egyptian leader and at least 8 of his aides. Some of the attackers were killed, and Egyptian officials identified the captured assailants as Islamic fundamentalists, opposed to Sadat's relations with Israel and the West. Anwar Sadat was eulogized as a man of peace by his 2 Camp David partners, Jimmy Carter in Plains, Georgia, and Israeli Prime Minister Begin in Jerusalem, and by President Reagan at the White House.
I don't know of anyone who's ever contributed more towards peace on earth in my lifetime, perhaps this century, than has President Sadat.
Personal friendship was established between us. I therefore today lost not only a partner to the peace process, but also a friend.
Anwar Sadat was admired and loved by the people of America. His death today, an act of infamy, cowardly infamy, fills us with horror. America has lost a close friend, the world has lost a great statesman, and mankind has lost a champion of peace.
The U.S. delegation to the Sadat funeral included former Presidents Nixon, Ford, and Carter. Israeli Prime Minister Begin led his country's delegation. Mutual Cairo correspondent Paul Kaner described the funeral.
As President Sadat's coffin was lowered into its resting place beneath the tomb to the unknown soldier, where only a few days ago President Sadat had been gunned down, Mrs. Sadat wept openly, and even the stony-faced President-to-be Hosni Mubarak could not hide his emotion. The President had been taken to his resting place in a horse-drawn gun carriage to a huge military escort.
At year's end, the men charged with killing Sadat are on trial in Egypt. Anwar Sadat is best remembered in the U.S. for working for peace in his troubled part of the world.
No event or development can shake our belief that peace is the word of God and the only road to a happy future.
Anwar Sadat speaking at the White House on his last visit to the U.S. in August of 1981. While most of the world mourned the loss of Anwar Sadat, Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi celebrated the death of the Egyptian leader. In November, it was revealed that the U.S. had reliable information that Libyan-trained hit squads plotted to kill President Reagan and other officials. Reporters asked the president about Gaddafi's denials of Libyan involvement in any plot.
I wouldn't believe a word he says, if I were you.
He says he wants the evidence, and if you don't have any evidence, then you must be a liar.
We have the evidence, and he knows it.
The president urged Americans in Libya to leave the country. Poland's Solidarity Labor Union verbally sparred with the government for a year before the Warsaw regime took the union to the mat. After a year of shaking its angry fists at the government, Solidarity was hauled off in shackles. On the night of December 12th, tanks rumbled through Warsaw. On Sunday the 13th, Poland awoke in the grip of martial law. Solidarity leader Lech Wałęsa and many of his followers were taken into custody. Communication with the outside world was shut down. Even though troublemakers faced the death penalty, there was open defiance to the military rule imposed by General Wojciech Jaruzelski. Westerners who left Poland after the martial law crackdown told of army tanks on the streets and soldiers fighting anyone resisting military rule. After fleeing Poland, American teacher Barbara Lupak described the actions of Polish riot police in the city of Wrocław.
Their tactics are absolutely brutal. They very often break students' arms and legs and beat them over the heads and other portions of their anatomy. They are really, truly malicious in their intent, and they are the strike breakers. They are the riot police.
Barbara Lupak, who taught English in Poland, spoke after arriving in West Germany. In the wake of the martial law in his homeland, Poland's ambassador to Washington, Romuald Spisowski, asked for and received political asylum in the U.S.
The cruel night of darkness and silence was spread over my country.
Ambassador Spisowski ended an emotional speech at the State Department by saying, "Long live Poland." Poland's ambassador to Japan also defected to the U.S. President Reagan warned that what he called the crime of Warsaw's leaders would cost them dearly. And in a December 23rd speech, the president indicated that he saw the mark of the Russian bear's claw on Poland.
A tragic event now occurring in Poland almost 2 years to the day after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan have been precipitated by public and secret pressure from the Soviet Union.
On December 29th, to protest the martial law in Poland, President Reagan imposed several trade sanctions against the Soviet Union, sanctions including a ban on the sale of high-technology equipment and a suspension of Soviet maritime and aviation rights in the U.S. The Poland story is a people story, and the sounds of Christmas Day 1981 included the sad voices of Polish refugees in Vienna singing carols. The year ends with Poland desperately short of food, under martial law, and facing economic disaster. Coming up, a look at Reaganomics, the space shuttle, and the first woman Supreme Court justice. You are listening to 1981, the year in review on Mutual Radio. I'm Peter Mayer. From Mutual Radio News, this is 1981, the year in review.
The House will kindly come to order.
As the 97th Congress convened in January, there was a new political lineup on Capitol Hill, a lineup that would play a vital role in forging major changes in government programs. Republicans, in a dramatic comeback from the aftermath of the Watergate scandal, elected not only a president in 1980, but also the first GOP-controlled Senate since Eisenhower's first term. The president and his Republican friends on the Hill served notice that the economy would be their first target. On February 5th, in his first broadcast address from the Oval Office, the president sounded the administration's economic alarm.
It's time to recognize that we've come to a turning point. We're threatened with an economic calamity of tremendous proportions. And the old business-as-usual treatment can't save us.
The president called for cutting taxes and reducing federal spending. He elaborated on those goals in his State of the Union address 2 weeks later when he called for sweeping budget cuts and major revisions in social programs, some dating from the Franklin Roosevelt administration. The president offered this reassurance to
those who, through no fault of their own, must depend on the rest of us, the poverty-stricken, the disabled, the elderly, all those with true need, can rest assured that the social safety net of programs they depend on are exempt from any cuts.
The message also included Reagan's plan to cut income taxes by 10% a year for 3 years and to provide businesses with more liberal depreciation write-offs. When the House finally passed the budget package in June, it included reductions in such programs as food stamps. House Speaker Tip O'Neill took to the floor of the House to criticize the budget cuts and the president's social safety net.
A safety net? Oh, what a net you've weaved. You have entrapped those who America have tried to loosen through the years. They will never again ever be able to move out of where they are. It's a trap. It's not a safety net.
But to the dismay of O'Neill and other Democratic leaders, a group of 29 conservative Democrats who got the nickname Boll Weevils supported the administration budget cut plan. Congress approved the administration tax cut plan in July, winning in the House after what Speaker O'Neill called a telephone blitz like this nation has never seen. Congress in 1981 also approved the administration's request for a record defense budget. Reagan administration economic policies came under heavy fire on a Sunday in September when an estimated 260,000 people came to Washington to protest the economic plan and cutbacks on longtime social programs. The protest, called Solidarity Day, was organized by the AFL-CIO. Speakers included labor leader Lane Kirkland.
Tax cuts, transferring resources from the common good to the private purses of the rich, are proving the most irresponsible fiscal act of our time.
Lane Kirkland, along with other labor and civil rights leaders, led the Solidarity Day March in Washington on September 19th. As 1981 draws to a close, the final verdict is awaited on what has come to be called Reaganomics. Reaganomics, a marriage of spending cuts and tax cuts. Administration economists see the plan as reviving business and the economy, pulling down inflation, interest rates, and eventually unemployment. Inflation is lower, and it is expected to dip below 10% in 1981 for the best showing in 3 or 4 years. Interest rates soared to new highs at mid-year, with conventional mortgage rates topping 18% for the first time. The housing market was in bad shape because of the interest rates, and high interest rates socked the auto industry, contributing to nationwide unemployment, which hit a 6-year high of 8.4%. Auto worker Tom Kovach, laid off after 9 years on the job at a GM plant in Baltimore, is bitter about his predicament, and Kovach blames the White House.
A lot of people believed that Reagan would do something. I guess in contrast to Carter's do-nothingness is the way a lot of people saw it. But he's doing the things that he said he was going to do, and it's surprising people now, whether they weren't listening, that he said he was going to do this or didn't believe it or what. But he's doing them, and it's surprising them, and it's hurting them.
Laid-off auto worker Tom Kovach says the administration should do more to restrict auto imports. One of the main architects of the administration economic plan was in the doghouse with the White House in November. Budget Director David Stockman, in an interview with the Atlantic Monthly, was quoted as saying that the Reagan economic plan was a Trojan horse designed to give tax breaks to the rich. President Reagan summoned Stockman to the White House for a lecture.
My visit to the Oval Office for lunch with the president was more in the nature of a visit to the woodshed after supper.
Stockman told reporters that he offered to resign, but that Reagan refused to accept his resignation. Just as the uproar over David Stockman's ill-timed comments started to die down, the president's national security advisor, Richard Allen, became the center of controversy. A Japanese newspaper revealed that Allen was given a $1,000 gift in January by a Japanese magazine for arranging an interview with Nancy Reagan. Mutual White House correspondent Bill Grudy asked Allen about the incident.
I was offered nothing. I merely received something on behalf of someone else who was put away for safekeeping. That's the long and the short of it. Would you take it again? If I did, I would immediately dispatch it to the appropriate authorities here in the White House.
Richard Allen insisted the money was an honorarium that was not meant for him, and he said he placed the money in his office safe, but forgot it was there. Allen went on leave from his White House post. At year's end, the Justice Department had cleared Richard Allen, but the National Security Advisor remained on leave while the White House pursued its own investigation. Along with his 1981 economic victories, President Reagan scored a major foreign policy win on Capitol Hill with Senate approval of the administration proposal to sell sophisticated AWACS jets to Saudi Arabia. The House said no to the AWACS sale in October, but by law, the sale could only be blocked if both houses of Congress voted disapproval. The Senate, after some tough administration lobbying, approved the AWACS sale by a vote of 52 to 48. Senate Majority Leader Howard Baker guided the proposal through the Senate.
There are more brave souls in the Senate today than I ever knew existed, and it really worked out very well. And I think it was a big victory that'll have repercussions and benefit even beyond just this proposal.
Senate Minority Whip Alan Cranston was the unsuccessful leader of the effort to block the AWACS deal.
Pressures from the White House, from the president, were too much to overcome, and I feel that some senators lost sight of the fact that they have a responsibility to go with the president when he is right, but to oppose him when he is wrong, regardless of the parties each are affiliated with.
Democratic Senator Alan Cranston of California. That AWACS sale to Saudi Arabia was only part of a deteriorating U.S.-Israeli relationship. In June, Israeli jets bombed and destroyed an Iraqi nuclear reactor near Baghdad. Israeli Prime Minister Begin defended the raid. Begin said Israel had information that the Iraqi plant was within months of producing material that would have enabled the Baghdad government to make nuclear weapons.
I said that Israel will not tolerate any enemy, not any Arab country, any enemy, to develop weapons of mass destruction against the people of Israel.
The U.S. condemned the Israeli raid and delayed the delivery of F-16 fighters to Israel. The Arab world also condemned the Israeli attack. The UN Security Council unanimously condemned Israel for the raid, but it did not go along with Iraq's demand to clamp an arms embargo on Israel. There was another chill in U.S.-Israeli ties in July after Israeli jets bombed a downtown section of Beirut, according to Lebanese sources, killing 300 people. The target of the attack was the headquarters of a PLO guerrilla movement. Following the raid, the U.S. indefinitely suspended F-16 deliveries to Israel, citing escalating violence in the Middle East. In December, the roller coaster U.S.-Israeli relationship dipped to a new low when Israel annexed the Golan Heights. The U.S. voted for a UN Security Council resolution condemning the action. The Reagan administration suspended a strategic cooperation agreement with Israel. Coming up, the traffic cops of the skies go on strike, and the space shuttle makes history. You're listening to Mutual Radio's The Year in Review. Nearly 12,000 air traffic controllers went on strike in August, and this was the rallying cry of picketing New York City members of the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Association. ATCO members across the country walked off the job in a dispute over pay and working conditions. On August 3rd, the president put the strikers on notice.
I must tell those who failed to report for duty this morning, they are in violation of the law, and if they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated.
But PATCO President Robert Poli would not budge.
In good conscience, I will not order my members to go back to work.
President Reagan stuck by his warning to the striking controllers, and on August 4th, Mr. Reagan told reporters,
I have no choice. The law is very explicit. They understood the law. They took an oath in writing that they would not strike. I think it's not a case of firing. I think they've quit.
And after official word on the firings was handed down August 5th, Union President Poli would still not back off.
Our people are as strong as they were before. The strike continues.
Some local union leaders were taken to jail for defying court injunctions against the strike. Striking controllers warn that without their presence at the towers and radar scopes, the skies would be unsafe. The first day of the strike caused confusion in air terminals, but with supervisors and new recruits filling the jobs of the strikers, the dire consequences predicted by PATCO did not come true. Since August, flights have been reduced and the airlines have suffered economic losses. As for PATCO, the union has been decertified. President Reagan refuses to let the controllers return to their old jobs, but they can apply for other government posts. While 1981 saw problems with air travel, travel to outer space was A-OK. 1981 was the year of the Space Shuttle, the first spaceship designed for round trips. Mutual correspondent Jim Slade was at Cape Canaveral as the new era in manned spaceflight opened on April 12th.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start.
There's the engine. There's the smoke. And she tips back. There's liftoff. Space Shuttle Columbia is on her way. Beginning to pitch over, beginning to roll onto its azimuth, getting ready to get into the line of flight, rolling around. The spacecraft, the astronauts are now lying on their back, and listen to that sound.
Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen were aboard the first space shuttle, and from outer space, Crippen gave Columbia high marks.
I think we've got something that's really going to mean something to the country and the world. This vehicle is performing like a champ, like all of us that have worked so long on it knew that you would.
54 and a half hours after blastoff, Columbia broke through the clouds at Edwards Air Force Base, California, becoming the first fixed-wing space vehicle to return from space.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful. You'll have to take it up to hangar, Joe. We're going to dust it off first.
Capcom Joe Allen and astronaut John Young made it all sound routine. Proof of Columbia's reusability came in November when astronauts Joe Engle and Richard Truly blasted off on what was planned as a 5-day mission. On November 4th, with 31 seconds left on the countdown clock, the mission had to be scrubbed because of technical problems. Engel and Truly made it to space November 12th, only to be ordered home early because of a fuel cell problem. Capcom Sally Ride gave the bad news to Truly.
We're running a minimum mission, and you'll be coming in tomorrow.
Oh, okay, that's not so good.
Think of it that you got all of the good OSTA data and all the RMS data, and you just did too good a job. We're going to bring you in early.
Truly's chuckle was unconvincing. Despite the glitches, the second shuttle mission accomplished a number of goals, including the successful testing of a 50-foot mechanical arm that will deploy and retrieve satellites on future missions. The U.S. hit another space milestone in 1981 as the unmanned Voyager 2 zoomed in on Saturn, relaying startling pictures of the ringed planet. Spokesman Gary Vanderwood at the Jet Propulsion Lab in California described the view of Saturn.
We saw moons go by and come closer and closer. We had good looks at the rings with a tremendous crowd of the representative press here. The mood was extremely high.
Voyager swooped to within 63,000 miles of Saturn, telling scientists on Earth that instead of a few rings as once believed, the planet is circled by thousands of rings. President Reagan made history in July when he nominated the first woman to the U.S. Supreme Court.
I will send to the Senate the nomination of Judge Sandra Day O'Connor of Arizona Court of Appeals for confirmation as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court.
The president nominated Judge O'Connor to replace retiring Justice Potter Stewart. Judge O'Connor's nomination was well received in almost all quarters, except on the far right, which said she had once taken a pro-abortion stance when she was a member of the Arizona legislature. During confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill, Alabama Republican Senator Jeremiah Denton asked Judge O'Connor about her stand on abortion.
It remains offensive at all levels. The question is what exceptions will be recognized in the public sector. That's really the question.
Where do you feel that
I find that
should occur?
it's a problem at any level. Where you draw the line as a matter of public policy is really the task of the legislator to determine.
Judge O'Connor refused to prejudge matters that might come before the High Court. When the Senate passed final judgment on her nomination, the vote to approve was 99-0. Sandra Day O'Connor went on to be sworn in as the first woman justice in the history of the High Court. The sound of trash can lids banging on the streets of Belfast. The rallying call of Irish Roman Catholics demonstrating following the deaths of IRA hunger striker Bobby Sands and 9 other imprisoned IRA members. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher would not yield to IRA demands for political prisoner status. The Prime Minister spoke in the House of Commons after Sands' death.
He chose to take his own life. It was a choice his organization did not allow to many of their victims.
IRA prisoners at Mays Prison in Belfast ended 7 months of hunger strikes in October. The prisoners' families had had enough and refused to let them die. Despite problems with Northern Ireland and summertime urban riots in London and other cities, Britain found something to cheer about on July 29th. A royal wedding. Prince Charles, heir to the throne, wed Lady Diana Spencer. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the Reverend Robert Runcie, had this view of the ceremony.
Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day.
No one blamed the bride when she failed to repeat the groom's many names exactly in order.
I, Diana Francis.
I, Diana Francis.
Take thee, Charles Philip Arthur George.
Take thee, Philip Charles Arthur George.
To my wedded husband.
To my wedded husband.
It was in November that Buckingham Palace announced that a royal birth is expected in the spring. And these foreign stories made news in 1981. Socialist Francois Mitterrand became president of France. In Greece, another socialist, Andreas Papandreou, became premier. One of the worst disasters to hit the U.S. in 1981 came on a Friday night in July in Kansas City, Missouri. A tea dance turned to tragedy when 2 giant walkways collapsed and plunged to the ground floor of the Kansas City Hyatt Regency Hotel. The death toll eventually reached 113. Eleanor Dunsworth was among the survivors.
It was just an explosion of glass. I have glass all over me. I felt as though I had glass in my eyes and all over me. It was just a horrible explosion and crash.
Margie McKenzie also made it out alive.
I heard the noise and looked up and just saw this lower level buckle right into the middle, and people coming down through the middle of it, and no place to go but down. But what is surprising is that top fourth floor that initially fell did not have that many people on it. In fact, I don't remember that there was very many at all because that's so high up.
Some of those killed in the Kansas City hotel disaster were on the walkways. Other victims were crushed beneath the structures. Every parent's nightmare was played out in Atlanta. In a story that started in 1979, 28 black children were murdered over a 2-year period. In June, Atlanta police arrested 23-year-old Wayne Williams and charged him with 2 of the slayings. Atlanta Mayor Maynard Jackson spoke with reporters after the arrest.
The town is strong, united, I think feeling some modicum of relief. It does not mean that we believe it's over. We're still very cautious. We still watch our children like hawks, as every parent ought to do in every city in this country.
Atlanta Mayor Jackson constantly urged his city to remain calm during the investigation of the child killings. At year's end, Wayne Williams went on trial. Since the arrest of Wayne Williams, the child killings have stopped in Atlanta. Californians will remember 1981 as the year of the medfly. The crop-threatening pest, the Mediterranean fruit fly, was spotted in the state in the summer, sparking a controversy over aerial pesticide spraying. California Governor Jerry Brown at first opposed the spraying, but later changed his mind while expressing lingering doubts.
When you see bugs and goldfish starting to die, you say, hey, maybe we're next. And while this particular chemical appears to be very safe, still we've got to begin to build a constituency to control things in a more biologically safe way.
The medfly was discovered in several parts of California, but agricultural experts managed to prevent massive devastation of crops. 1981 will be remembered as the year the baseball parks fell silent. A players' strike triggered by compensation for free agents wiped out nearly a third of the season. Depending on your point of view, the 81 baseball season was either the shortest or the longest in history. We said goodbye to some well-known people in 1981, people who made us laugh, Jack Albertson and George Jessel, actors and actresses who sometimes made us cry, Natalie Wood, William Holden, Robert Montgomery, Ross Martin, and Richard Boone. Screenwriter Paddy Chayefsky and director William Wyler died in 81. And there were those who wrote and sang our songs. That's Stardust by the late Hoagy Carmichael, who also penned Georgia on My Mind and so many other favorites. The voice of singer-songwriter Harry Chapin was tragically silenced when he died in an auto accident. Harry Chapin, known for songs with a message and for his work to fight world hunger. And rock and roll lost Bill Haley.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock, we're gonna rock.
Veteran songwriter Harry Warren, the man who wrote Chattanooga Choo Choo, also died in 1981, and the sports world lost boxing great Joe Louis. There was a final salute for 5-star General Omar Bradley, the GI's general. Israeli warrior Moshe Dayan died during the year. In Latin America, Panamanian leader General Omar Torrijos was killed in a plane crash. Civil rights leaders mourn the loss of longtime NAACP chief Roy Wilkins. Cancer took Connecticut's Ella Grasso, the first woman elected governor of a state in her own right. Poland lost Cardinal Stefan Wyszynski. American labor said farewell to Teamsters President Frank Fitzsimmons and to Jerry Worf, leader of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Will Durant died not long after his wife and co-writer Ariel. And there was the death of author William Saroyan. Pioneer broadcast journalist and author Lowell Thomas said so long in 1981. News stories honor no timeline set by the calendar. Many stories from 1981 will make headlines in 1982. The situation in Poland is far from resolved, and Congress, facing midterm elections, will likely be more stubborn when it comes to approving further budget cuts. News came at a relentless pace in 1981. It seems like there are more things worth forgetting than remembering about the year. But 1981 was indeed an unforgettable year. From Mutual Radio News, this has been 1981, the year in review. Production assistance by Bart Tessler and Kevin Delaney. This is Peter Mayer, Mutual News.